I was determined to check this school out because I thought this could be, real, or it could be not so real. So I thought I have to go check this out. So I actually hitchhiked across Canada and had wonderful adventures. It was a great trip. I ended up, with my backpack, hunting down this obscure place called Watertown in the Boston area. So I finally get there. It's in a beautiful old mill building on the Charles River with big windows facing the Charles River. A wonderful space, like an incredible open loft space. And in this little corner office, there sits a couple of guys. So they kind of described to me that there was a teacher that had come over from Hong Kong and southern China area. So I said, okay, I definitely want to do this. They said, well, there's one catch. Dr. Song might not get his green card. And if he doesn't, this will be the last class that he teaches.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. The other day I received an anonymous email telling me that I was a discussing racist, extracting and appropriating community knowledge with my Orientalist performance, that I should consider my settler roots, close the business, and donate the proceeds to the Asian communities that I have thieved from. Since the episode you're about to enjoy is part of a history series, I thought I'd take a moment to give consideration to the accusation, and I go so far as to say short-sightedness, of the email that recently came my way. Now, to give the writer their due, I have over the years thought about the history of Chinese medicine in a naive way. I imagine that the history connected me to the pantheon of keen-sighted practitioners of the past, and that connection via history would give my acupuncture some weight and validity. Because acupuncture had enough merit and potency for it to survive the centuries, maybe it would also prove helpful to me as a beginner with my clumsy hands. For sure, I have leaned on the history of Chinese medicine in a way that propped up my ego while I was working out how the principles of acupuncture can come alive in this moment through the work in which I'm engaged. It is easy to fetishize the history of acupuncture. My patients do it all the time. Yours might as well. Who doesn't like being connected to something that carries the authority and weight of something that has survived and evolved through the centuries? Reading Volker Scheid's books, Chinese Medicine in Contemporary China and Currents of Tradition in Chinese Medicine, it's shown me that the medicine I think I'm connected to is largely imaginative. To think that my work is directly descended from Zhongjing or Danxi or even a Republican-era doctor, it's not. Most recently, reading Eric Karshmer's Prescriptions for Virtuosity, that too has disabused me of the notion that my practice is anything like that of practitioners of the past. And yet, there is a thread of principles that winds its way down through time. And those principles, they give us something to work with as they come alive in our perception and experience. The people that help to bring acupuncture and, what do I say this week? East Asian, Oriental, Chinese, non-Indo-European, just how do I describe that part of the world without detonating the judgment that determines I belong on the right side of history or in the gulag? The people that helped to bring acupuncture into the mainstream of the West, my sense is they were on the cresting edge of cultural change. They were the least extractive people around. They were looking to bring the best parts of different cultures together in a way that made their world better. For sure, it is a sign of the times and the relentless grinding of yin and yang, mutually transforming into one another, that brings us to this moment when it is suspect to allow yourself to enjoy the gifts and perspectives of another culture. There was a time when mixing cultures together was considered a way forward into peace, understanding, and brotherhood. Now, We live in a time of xenophobic anxiety, that allowing ourselves to be touched and influenced by another culture, it's considered to be the sin of appropriation. Where we used to consider a beneficial blending of the boundaries, now it's a settler enterprise of extraction and exploitation. I wonder if other cultures worry about their adaptation of our Western culture. For example, Western medicine, with its fantastic ability to deal with emergent, life-threatening situations. Is that life-saving medical technology something that should only remain within the white European cultures in which it was developed? Or is it something beneficial that should be shared with the world? It's at the boundaries, the edges, where there is a capacity for merging, communication, and exchange, where the differences that make a difference allow for blending. These are always the vital frontiers of commerce, exchange, and the possibility of considering new, culturally transformative ideas. I'm curious, how do you think about your work with acupuncture? Are you stealing something from another culture? Are you adding through your experience to another culture? Should we be siloed and segregated based on race, skin color, or culture? Or is it more connective to blend cultures and ideas, not unlike how ecosystems love to thrive on diversity? I'm curious to get your perspective. Maybe even a panel discussion on this topic is in order. Why not reach out and share your thoughts on this topic with me? The people who put their heart, attention, sweat, and labor into helping acupuncture and Chinese medicine take root in the West, they were explorers. They lived at the fringe of conventional society. And as the Chinese would say, they 开了眼界, they opened their world eyes. The late 60s and early 70s were a time of openness and experimentation in the West. It was the beginning of the civil rights movement, more equality for women, and the recognition that sexuality included more than the love between men and women. Cultural norms were questioned, and that included dietary practices, the healing arts, and the relationship between humans and the planet. It was in this rich milieu of cultural change that acupuncture started to take root in the imagination and then practice of those who were willing to follow a path with heart. We're going to hear more about those early days with Randall Barolet. Some of you might recognize his name. It's on both editions of Formulas and Strategies from Eastland Press. Randall did not set out to be a translator. That was something that organically showed up as he followed his interest with Chinese medicine. In the words of Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, what a long, strange trip it's been. We'll get into this in a moment, but first, a word from the people and companies that make it possible for you to enjoy Qiological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com. And where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Randall Barolet, welcome to Geological.
Ooh, it's so nice to be here.
I'm happy to have you. Really delighted. We met each other. Actually, I met you almost 30 years ago because your name was on a book that was in my acupuncture school. But we actually met in person a few months ago at the Pacific Symposium.
That's right.
And that was a delight. But again, I first met you through your work with Formulas and Strategies. It was the herb book that we used at our school.
Yeah, that's quite a long story.
I thought it might be, but we're going to get an even longer story because this is our history series. And so we're going to take a trip in the Wayback Machine. And you're old enough to know what the Wayback Machine was.
I used to watch that every day when I came home from school. Rocky and Friends, Rocky J. Squirrel and Bullwinkle the Moose.
Wait a minute. Was it Rocky J. Squirrel? I thought it was Sherman and Mr. Peabody.
Well, it was Mr. Peabody and his pet boy Sherman.
Mr. Peabody and his pet boy Sherman.
And you'd go in the Wayback Machine to different periods in history.
Yeah. So we're going to do that. We're going to step in, we're going to take a trip. I'm dialing it to when you first heard about acupuncture. What was going on in your life? And beyond that, Randall, not just what was going on in your life. What was happening in the world? What were the news headlines? What was Walter Cronkite talking about? What were the issues of the day that had you riled up? What was going on there?
Well, I have to actually say, as a preface to answer your question, that I did have resistance when you invited me. I have to apologize for my resistance. I really did not want to do this. And I think it's mainly just it was, insecurity and fear reaction. But I felt like I really would have nothing much to say to your audience of people who are advanced in their own way. Also because my methods and practices have evolved over the years. But I have to say that the ground of everything was my grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal grandmother. As you'd say in Norwegian or Danish, mormor, your mother's mother. She was a fantastic person. Sometimes I've said she was like a saint. Selfless, kind, generous, wise. And she, after her husband passed, she moved in with us. So I had this great luxury of growing up with my grandmother in the house.
How old were you when that happened?
I would recollect she moved in. Well, of course, I would do little field trips with her before she moved in with us also. She'd come and get me, and we'd take the train. This is on Long Island, New York. So we'd get on the Long Island Railroad. And to me, this was like, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. An epic journey. This huge machine would pull up, and we'd climb up into it and take this journey, which in reality was probably a few miles to the next village where her sister lived. And we'd go in the garden with her sister, and she would just talk to me about cultivation in the garden. And she was like the basis of the environmentalism of Chinese medicine. That is the human relation to the environment and the natural world. And she had a lot of principles like don't sit in a draft. Don't let the wind hit your neck. Don't go barefoot on a cold stone floor. And then various ways of eating and foods and so forth. So she really laid down the fundamentals of Chinese medicine because she had carried the folk wisdom. She was from originally, actually, her story's complex, but her family is from Austria. She grew up her first several years in Austria. Actually, she was born in Detroit, if you can believe this.
Oh, my goodness. What a story.
Her family was so poor that they sent the kids back to Austria so they would have enough to eat of proper food. So eventually they found their way to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, new immigrant arrivals area of Manhattan. I guess what would be the Bowery now. But she introduced me to a consideration of health being based on your interaction with the environment and also emotional life, kindness. Really, kindness and generosity was her teaching more than anything. She'd worry about herself last. And she made a deep impression on me I think she lived with us probably from when I was maybe 5, 6 years old until I went away to university. So the reason I surrendered to come on your podcast was because after you said, you must have something to say, I realized I did. And what I had to say was gratitude for all the humans in my life. And it would start with my mother and father. But in particular, the person in my home that I was closest to was my grandmother. And I would sit with her. She had this old writing desk with a roll top. And I'd sit there and just listen. And she would tell me stories of her life from where she was born. She crossed the ocean twice in a steam-driven paddle wheel sailing schooner.
A steam-driven paddle-wheeled sailing schooner.
Yeah, the old days. She was born in 1884. And she went, as I said, they sent the children, because they were starving people at that point. They actually lost children at an early age. So I think they started out with something like 11 children, and it went down to 8. I remember she had the actual leather ticket holder from her first crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. And her first crossing of the Atlantic Ocean was from America to Europe to go back to the family in Austria so children would have enough to eat.
That's amazing.
And she told me vivid stories about crossing the ocean in what's called steerage, which was down in the very bottom of the boat.
Cargo, basically cargo.
Yeah, basically this was a human cargo.
Human cargo.
And
it was what, like 3 weeks across at that point? in a boat
I
like
did
that?
not ask her, but it was weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Yeah. And these boats were basically multi-masted sailing vessels, but because the steam-powered age had come about, they had paddle wheels on the side, huge, giant paddle wheels. And so they could be steam driven, if there was a doldrum with no wind.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now there's an interesting transitional
Amazing,
technology.
but a terrible design for a boat crossing the North Atlantic.
It's like two different things just squeezed together. They don't quite go, but they kind of go.
Yeah, it's just if you get in rough seas, the boat starts to break up. So she would tell me, her storytelling was my first teaching
Yeah.
that laid the groundwork to open my thinking towards another way of thinking about health and life and the mind and the emotions.
You had your grandmother as your first teacher. So you come from a family lineage.
Well, I would suppose, to give due credit, my mother and father would have been my first teachers.
Sure.
But my grandma was in some way like my actual mother.
Okay. But you didn't hear about acupuncture till later.
Oh, no, much later. I think, like many of your guests have said on your podcast, it was this Nixon goes to China and the reporter from the New York Times who had, I think, some acupuncture anesthesia.
Yeah.
Acupuncture analgesia. Yeah, Rustin. I think it was around that news splash that I became more aware of China. I wasn't thinking about China. I wasn't thinking about Asia.
What were you thinking about?
I was a little scientist and a musician. I was two things, really, a musician and a scientist as a child. I had a very serious state of mind as my first 17, 18 years of life. I was very drawn to mathematics and physics. And I think at some level, I probably wanted to be an astronaut.
God, who didn't back then?
Yeah, it was like every little boy's dream.
It was mine.
I think it's a very common thing. There was the race to the moon was going on, similar to today, but with people. So I didn't really, I never had the idea, even when I went to study at the New England School of Acupuncture, which had just opened. There's a whole story about how I found it. But what really led me to the Chinese connection from my own path was poetry.
Poetry?
Yeah, and meditation. So during my university years, I had a wonderful roommate, Paul Lewis, who was a poet and a gentleman. And Paul Lewis, I think, probably was the first one who tipped me off to the writings of Ginsberg, Kerouac, the beat generation, basically, the beat poets, Ferlinghetti, etc.
The beat poets, yeah. Gary Snyder.
So, Gary Snyder made a huge impression on me. And again, Gary Snyder ties back into the Taoist connection into Chinese culture. So I became, a voracious reader of poetry. And among the beat poets, there was always this mention of Zen or Buddhism in general. And so little by little, I stumbled upon poetry of Li Bo, and Du.
Okay.
So these Tang poets and some poets.
You went right to the emblematic guys.
Very intriguing to me. And then, of course,
what was intriguing about it? What was it that got your attention?
What was intriguing about it?
Yeah.
Well, I think because in my high school years, I'd been mainly interested in music, poetry, photography, and filmmaking.
And science.
Science my academics was definitely based in physics and mathematics. And, it was, I think to some degree, I found it easy. And also I had a fabulous teacher, Shirley Fry, who taught the year of calculus and trigonometry also she taught. And she had a way of explaining mathematics that just made it crystal clear. So I have to give all due credit to Mrs. Fry of my high school. But anyway, So yeah, in high school, I was not. My passion was theater arts. I always was in the pit orchestra for all the high school musicals, playing trumpet. I was in the talent show playing guitar with backing up various singers and dancers. As a matter of fact, Linda Carter was a student at my high school. She was 1 year behind me. And so I actually backed Wonder Woman in her first theatrical work, the original Wonder Woman for television. And, so this was my passion.
Yeah.
It was just through, I would say, faulty high school counseling that I was gradually arm twisted and convinced that I should be studying something useful and practical, like engineering, physics.
Certainly there's that because, they want you to be, air quotes, successful and all that stuff. But it, look, you sounded
They
like
didn't want me to be a starving artist, which it turns out I am anyway. But
well, good luck with avoiding your destiny. So there's that.
exactly.
But you're kind of a weird kid. So you've got the science stuff and the math and it came easy to you. So it's like, oh yeah, I got that. That's easy. And then you got this other wide aspect of your spirit that enjoys the music. You would be a hard kid to like counsel because you had multiple. It's like you had multiple intelligences. That's a little unusual. Most of us are much, and one dimensional is not the right word, but let's just say you got a couple of different hefty pots you can of capability you could pull from. Most of us are like, yeah, I can draw, but I can't do math.
I played sports, but I wasn't.
And you
as
played
good
sports. What'd you play?
Oh yeah, basketball and track and field. Basically basketball and in track and field broad jump.
All right. So they tell you go. What they tell you to do? Go become an engineer.
Well, my guidance counselor was a fine person. She just had an agenda, and she was projecting her agenda for me. And that was how she did her counseling. She wanted me to go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, something like that. And she wanted me to be, use my God-given talents in mathematics and physics. And that's what she wanted me to do. And I just said, okay, I'll do that. Because as I said, I was enamored of going into space. As a matter of fact, when my eyes changed and I had to get glasses for being nearsighted around that time, I knew, the astronaut thing, at that point, to be an astronaut, you couldn't have
That's
glasses.
Right. I remember that. I was like 8 years old or something when I found out if you wear glasses, you can't be an astronaut. And I was like, damn, I'm wearing glasses. All right, no astronaut for me.
Right. But I was very, determined and stubborn, so I got a pilot's license. I think I qualified by the time I was 19 or 20. And I joined a flying club.
Did you go to one of those Ivies?
Well, the funny thing was, of course, again, back to the astronaut theme that sort of runs through this part of my life. I heard that Cornell, which was among the Ivy League institutions that she found acceptable, they had an aeronautical laboratory. So I just got hooked on this idea that I would study aeronautics at Cornell. Anyway, not quite how it turned out. What I actually ended up registering in was environmental engineering. Because at this point, I'd been reading the Gary Snyder and the Beat Poets. And Gary Snyder, as your audience probably knows, is, among other things, a nature poet.
Well, they may or may not know, but now they know.
Yeah. And quite a poetic philosopher.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was inspired towards getting closer to Mother Earth, let's say.
You're following what your grandmother taught you.
Exactly. It was coming back to the maternal influences, the mother's mother.
Yeah.
Coming back to Earth. So by that point, I'm not thinking about going into space anymore. But I did, as I say, determinedly became a pilot.
How do you go from environmental engineering to Chinese medicine?
It's the poetry. Okay, so here's the deal. I end up, let's see, how do I even begin to explain this journey? So imagine you're in love with the Chinese poets. And so you buy some, and you have been reading Zen training books and Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And this has become my little personal guidebook for life. Now you start seeing these Chinese characters and Japanese characters.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because I was in the arts, in my passions in high school, I was very attracted to this. So I got some ink and brushes and started trying to make Chinese characters without even knowing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I actually got to the point where I could paint Chinese characters with my watercolor ink. And I mean, I'm skipping ahead, but at a certain point, I was working in a hospital and as a physical therapy orderly. I did that for a couple, 2-3 years in orthopedics and physical therapy. Now, the hospital environment I found very oppressive and stagnant. The windows didn't open, for example. It was like a hermetically sealed container. And I also operated like a military hierarchy. So my idea was I'm going to bring some humanity into this situation. I'm going to start putting up Chinese poems on the wall when nobody's looking at. Take a little sticky tape, stick up a Chinese poem on the wall.
Uh-huh.
In translation, English translation, maybe with a few Chinese characters on the side that I had no idea what they meant. Well, finally, one of my colleagues in the physical therapy department, a woman named Anne Tway, she came over to me one day at work and said, leaned close and whispered, "You're the one putting up those poems." And I said, "Yeah," I confessed it was me. Anyway, she said, "Well, we discussed my interest in the Chinese poets." Her husband was Chinese. And she said, "Oh, I've got a book for you." This is like maybe a week later. She pulls me aside and says, "I've got a book for you." She hands me this large paperback book. I can't remember the author's name, but it was a book on shiatsu from Japan Press, maybe. And she said, "Here, you might find this interesting." I dived into this book, and the part that really got my attention was more even than the methods of shiatsu, was that preface was a historical review of Asian medicine and how it had come to Japan and how the Japanese indigenous culture developed it into these techniques. And I just thought, this is amazing, because as I was reading, they laid out some of the core principles. The voice of my grandmother was right there.
Mm-hmm.
The natural interface with the natural world, basically. This is already post university by several years. So that was the kind of first opening. And so I began to study shiatsu from this book, and I wanted to find a teacher because I thought I became aware there was a full diagnostic procedure. There was a body of theoretical knowledge, etc. And I thought, I've got to find a place to study. So I started writing letters to Japan and China. I'd go in the library and search up any way that I could try to find connection to hospitals or institutions for study. I got no replies back for about a year. Then one day I had written to an Institute of Shiatsu Study in New York City. I got this beautiful rice paper, hand ink pen writing. "Hello, my name is Wataru Ohashi. I'm coming to San Francisco. Come study with me." And I thought, this is incredible.
Yeah.
There's an actual teacher who's actually writing to me and saying, "Come study." So he was teaching a kind of introductory shiatsu intensive. I don't know, it was maybe a week long in San Francisco. So I took some days off and went down. And this was what I would call my first encounter with the chi, my first awareness of encounter with chi. One morning I would do some yoga stretching before we'd start the class. And of course I was a little hyper enthusiastic and managed to do something to my low back. and I
I
could
wouldn't know
barely.
anything about that.
Yeah, I think I recall somebody told a story somewhat like this before on your podcast. Anyway, so he said he looked at me like I could barely walk or move, bend over, and he said, "Here, come over here." And he took me over on a gym mat and did what was probably more of a chiropractic adjustment, but anyway, it was one of his shiatsu moves. And he, lifted up my legs, had me on my back, and did some work in my hara. And all of a sudden, I felt like as if the sun had risen in my abdomen. It was like a radiating energy that went out through my whole body. And so whatever he opened up, I felt the chi. I was, okay, I feel it. Now I know what the chi is. It's real. It became not just a word in a page, but it was very real what happened. And I was fully flexible again. So I became very intrigued with learning more. He offered to write a letter of introduction for me to go study in Japan with his teacher, who was Masunaga. All your listeners who are familiar with shiatsu would probably know Masunaga. He was one of the originators of what came to be called Zen shiatsu, a lot of stretching meridian work, sort of like a yoga of shiatsu. I did not end up going to Japan because what happened was I was at a party a few weeks later. I lived in Oregon. This is all working in Oregon in the hospital. Now, I went to this party and I bumped into somebody there who had just returned from Japan studying ceramics. Which, they're renowned ceramic artists.
Another fantastic tradition there.
So he shared his experience there. And then I told him, I just had encountered a Japanese teacher and I really want to deepen my study, but I can't find anything, any place to do it, in the U.S. So he said, well, you might want to get a copy. There's this new magazine. It's called East-West Journal, which I think was a macrobiotic originally. Anyway, so I found a copy of this East-West Journal. And on somewhere in there, page 5, 6, whatever, up in the corner, a little small ad, New England School of Acupuncture opening, taking classes, a 1-year program in acupuncture and Chinese diagnosis, etc. So I'm like jumping out of my skin. I can't even believe it. There's actually a school. Now, granted, it's on the other side of the United States.
Yeah, but that's not Japan.
It's not Japan.
They speak English.
You can drive there quite easily. So I got very fired up. I went into the department chief therapist and said, I'd really like to take a month and travel to Boston. I was determined to check this school out because I thought this could be, real or it could be not so real. So I thought I have to go check this out. So I actually hitchhiked across Canada. It took a good 7-8 days.
Not bad.
And had wonderful adventures. It was a great trip.
Yeah.
I ended up, with my backpack on the T in Boston, in the subway system, and hunting down this obscure place called Watertown in the Boston area. So I finally get there. It's in a beautiful old mill building on the Charles River with big windows facing the Charles River. A wonderful space, like an incredible open loft space. Probably previously had been some kind of mill, maybe a knitting mill or something. And in this little corner office, there sits a couple of guys and welcome. And I go in, and it's quite real. Matter of fact, these are 2 Harvard guys. And John Meyerson, you know because you've had him on your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of described to me that there was a teacher that had come over from Hong Kong and southern China area. And he had actually a full course in acupuncture. And it had been translated. I don't know if Dr. So actually I think he originally wrote it in Chinese or was dictated to somebody who wrote it. They had managed to either have Dr. So with help translate the whole course into, I think it was like a 3-volume set of 8.5 by 11 pages at that point. But it was real. I mean, there were all the points, basic theory, basic foundation, and with real emphasis on point location. Dr. So is very much a stickler about point location. So I said, okay, I definitely want to do this. They said, well, there's one catch. Dr. So might not get his green card. And if he doesn't, this will be the last class that he teaches. So, and it's starting, and this is like late August, and it's starting in 2 weeks. So I either have to like immediately, pitch my tent in Boston and just call back and say I'm not coming back. So the funny thing was, I did decide, okay, I'm just doing this. This is amazing.
I'm in.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
And they also said, and there's some other teacher also, they explained to me about Bob Bannever, who was teaching I think he had been from Van Buren training in the sort of French version of Vietnamese acupuncture. And then also there was a mystery teacher that was probably going to come who had been studying in Macau, which turned out to be Ted Kapcha. So talk about lucky timing. But it did require, I had to call up my employer and say, I'm not coming back. And the funny thing is, when I made that call, the head of the department said, yeah, we knew. We never expected you were going to come back.
Isn't it funny how sometimes other people know something about us? We don't know it yet ourselves, but there's something like in the field, so to speak. And they're like, oh, yeah, he's gone. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, the poet said it best, Bobby Burns. Oh, what a gift that God would give us to see ourselves as others see us. Mm. I think that's Burns. I'm not sure.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. So you were in. Is this really a thing? Hey, it's a real thing. One in?
Yeah, it was quite real.
Yeah, it was quite real. And it might be the last one. Last train. This is the last train. All right. You were on. You were in.
It turned out that one of my real good friends from college days was living in the Cambridge area. So I was able to move in temporarily with him until I found a place. And the tuition was literally almost to the dollar, everything I had in my savings account.
How perfect is that?
1 year tuition, I recollect, I could be confused about this, I think it was about $2,000 for a year.
And this is in what year?
Would have been 77, summer of 1977.
My suspicion that $2,000 in 1977 would probably be around maybe $25,000 in today's money.
Yeah, you could have bought a 1970 Volkswagen Bug for about $2,200.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the term yuan fun?
No, explain it.
Yuan fun. Yuan fun is often translated as fate. But fate.
Oh, fate?
Yeah.
Fate, yes.
Fate. But in Chinese, it's actually more like opportunity meets willingness. Right? There's these moments where it's like opportunity meets
Absolutely.
willingness. It's like a little pivotal moment. You don't get them all the time, but when you get it, the whole world is very, very fluid. You can recognize these moments because there's a fluidity and a kind of time is a little bit wonkety because it's this opportunity that truly, if you choose to do it, you can choose not to do it, but if you choose to do it, totally changes your life.
It's kind of metaphorically resonant to the Carlos Castaneda training with Don Juan when Don Juan has him jump off the cliff.
It is a leap. It's always a leap.
Because there is a kind of, you realize I'm jumping into an unknown, something that's unknown to me anyway. And it's a leap of faith. And it has, you go into a liminal space for you don't know how long.
That's right.
Where you're transiting from one world or one frame of reference to another. Mm-hmm. So anyway, back to the theme of gratitude, though. So I enroll in the school, and
you don't have to go back to Oregon to get a car because you just hitchhiked. You don't need a car.
Well, no, I did. I had my 1970 Volkswagen was parked next to my apartment, next to my house in Corvallis, Oregon, where I had been working in the hospital. So I'd been previously working since 1974 in daycare and nursing home, and then finally in the hospital. So I was sort of completed. I had gone back and completed pre-med work, and I went in the hospital specifically to find out which of these jobs should I orient myself towards. And I quickly eliminated medical doctor. That was not going to be for me.
And it turns out it was none of the above.
It turned out, actually, it was one of the above. I worked for a year or two in the orthopedic department. So I had a lot of close interface with the physical therapists who were working rehab or for people with hip surgeries, knee surgeries, you name it, auto accidents, worked with a logger, had a tree fall on him. Yeah, so anyway.
Anyway, here you are at NISA. You're studying this thing that's real.
Oh, yeah, I did have a car. That was what I wanted to just finish up. I just called up my roommates and said, just pull my car up to the end of the driveway and I'll be back next summer to get it. Which I did.
Next summer. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, those are the times were swiftly changing.
So here you are, you're studying at NISA, new school with
it was very, very exciting.
With a main teacher who may not be there in the near future because nobody knew what was happening.
Turned out he did get his green card and it carried on.
Lucky for all of us.
Absolutely. It was a blessed year. I want to express gratitude for everybody there, all the students, all the staff. It was an amazing time. You've had Rick Gold on. You probably had other. I didn't even know about your podcast until I met you at Pacific Symposium. That's how out of it. I've been living 26 years in Scandinavia.
Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. Back to this NISA for a moment. Was it a 1-year program at that point? What was it?
It was 1 year, I think like 10 months maybe. Dr. So had a cryptic way of expressing this short duration of teaching. He said, what I teach you is only for using, not for talking.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he was a very practical man, extremely practical man. And he had what he called his teaching a complete course in acupuncture.
At that point in the United States, it was as complete as you were going to find because it was just about all you could find.
It was just about, unless you had other access into the Chinese community.
Yeah, which most Caucasians didn't. Randall, at the end of a year, how were you different?
Oh, it was, I mean, there's so many dimensions of change going on. For one thing, I want to express gratitude for Michael Zucker, who was one of the founders of the Insight Meditation Society, and happened to be often, I'd be sitting next to him in lectures. A quiet and wise and wonderful person. Last I knew him, he was, I think, in San Francisco. He'd been in Boston for years after school. Anyway, Michael invited me to join a meditation retreat because he knew I was a meditator. And it was, I think, one of the first retreats, residential retreats. It was a 10-day session with Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, and Sharon Salzberg.
Okay, they were pretty young at that point, but they were...
It's back from Asia.
They were just getting started. Yeah, they were just back from Asia. And they were the heavy hitters, like the big triad.
So this just picked up on my, I'd been reading Japanese Buddhism, mainly was the text, Zen Training, fabulous book, and Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So that was one dimension of transformation going on, was through practice. Michael was very generous and kind in including me in that invitation. So that was, and the other aspect was Dr. So was like a force of nature. There was his teaching, very practical, very grounded, very down to earth, like a real grandfather. Just a fabulous guy, an astonishing person, really. He was also a Christian preacher.
He was a Christian preacher?
Yeah.
Dr. So.
I went. Yeah. He taught. I think might have been called another specific name of the church. Maybe it's called the Chinese Church of Boston or something. But I went to hear him preach, but he preached in Cantonese, so I didn't really know what he was saying. I was just beginning to study Chinese at that point.
You started your study of Chinese when you were at NISA in that first year of school.
Yeah, what happened was Ted Kapchuk showed up and was invited to teach a course that he called the Concepts of Chinese Medicine, or we used to just call it Concepts. Mm-hmm. Now, here is a person who would sit up in the front of the room with a couple of paperback books in Chinese and just talk, translating from the book. And I realized, I think most people realize there's a rite of passage here that you have to go through if you want access. And, at that point, as many people have said on your podcast, there was maybe 4 books in English, something like that. The Outline, Felix Mann, and a couple others that were not so helpful.
Yeah, you could read them in like a week.
Yeah. So I realized I got to learn Chinese if I really want to go into this. First of all, I arrived there. I really didn't know if I wanted to be an acupuncturist. I didn't go to school thinking I want to be an acupuncturist. My vision at that this is so hilarious. My vision at that point is I want to learn Chinese diagnosis. I want to learn the system of theoretical knowledge, and I want to learn something about dietary consultation and really know the meridian endpoint system so that I could do shiatsu. Mm-hmm. So I thought of myself more as a shiatsu therapist doing dietary consulting. But the first time I had clinic observation with Dr. So, and I saw people I had worked with in physical therapy for years with chronic conditions. These were the people who would be showing up at this clinic run by James Doyle, who was an osteopath, and I think it was in Newton Center, where Dr. So practiced. And when I saw him, he would have a person come in just like somebody I'd seen in physical therapy that would get hot packs and massage for like 3 years with very little change. They'd come in and see Dr. So, a couple of treatments, they'd be, jumping around the room. So it made a very strong impression on me. What could be done with a few needles and some knowledge? That's when I thought, okay, I think I have to be an acupuncturist. It was really amazing. But it was Ted who kind of opened up the door into the vast library that was available if you could read Chinese. So I enrolled in the Harvard Extension had a Chinese course available. So I enrolled in this Harvard Extension Chinese course. It was hopeless. I mean, I went at it for like 6 months and said, this is too hard. Can't do this. And then, of course, after a month off, I went back.
Okay, wait a minute. This is hopeless. I can't do this. After a month off, I went back. What happened?
Well, you realize there are some things that are worth, blood, sweat, and tears.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to read into the Chinese library is priceless. So just quit complaining. And everybody was telling me, who I would talk to about it, would say, yeah, it's hard. Matter of fact, it's sort of undoable, really, like you've often said on your podcast. You can read a medical book, but you couldn't read the newspaper.
Here's the deal. Had I stayed longer and had I focused on it, probably would have helped if I started younger too. But, my goal was to do medical Chinese. But here's what I learned about Chinese. Number one, the medical Chinese is doable. Even for someone as dull as myself with languages, I'm not great at it. But the great thing about any technical language is it's fairly limited. It's a limited vocabulary, limited set of concepts. So in some ways, medical Chinese is easier than, say, regular newspaper Chinese. Regular newspaper Chinese is, you're going to need some damn Chinese for that. But here's the thing. Had I put my mind to it because I decided it would have been important, I could have done it.
Talk about the fickle finger of fate.
Yeah.
Here's how I actually got serious about Chinese study. After this Harvard course, I had like no proficiency really.
And this is 6 months or a year?
In that course?
Yeah.
I mean, the total time I spent in it was probably 6 months.
Okay. So you're just getting started. I mean, Chinese takes a little time.
Yeah, of course. And I realized that. But what really happened was, again, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. Giovanni had initiated this so-called advanced acupuncture course for people with minimum 3 years experience to go to Nanjing College of Traditional Chinese Medicine. So after he came back, he decided to do it again, and he got another group of people together, and I joined in that group and went over. But first, I spent 5-6 months intensive Chinese study in Taiwan and Taichung at Taipei Language Institute.
Oh yeah, Taipei, TAI.
All with like Wei Giles and complex characters.
Uh-huh.
A nightmare of confusion. But
see, I find complex characters to be easier.
Well, you had a lot of Taiwanese time.
Well, it's where I really when I was in school, the school I went to, they wanted us to learn to read medical Chinese, so I started off reading simplified characters. Again, I wasn't that...
They're sketchier. Admittedly, they're sketchier than the complex characters.
But the great thing about the complex characters is there's so much more information. And so it's a little harder at first. But look, I figured if little kids can learn it, I can learn it, right? I mean, you learn what you put in front of you. Children learn what's put in front of them.
Well, little kids are so much more capable than we are.
Well, they are more capable. But the thing I found about the complex characters was as I started to understand them, there was so much more information in them. And so because they were like information rich, it became easier for me to do them. And then later when I went back to simplified, whole pieces were missing and it was much more difficult. But again, it's whatever you get used to. So all right, hang on. Wait, before China, Taiwan, like how did, I understand you wanted to do an intensive. Taichung Taipei Language Institute, how'd that happen?
Well, here's the thing. I apprenticed with Ted for a couple of years and Ted Kapchuk. At a certain point, we're sitting at his kitchen table and we're discussing things, and as we would do for hours. And he says, he's the one I think who told me it's a rite of passage. You have to go through And he had another colleague, another student, who was living in Taichung and had been studying Chinese. And she was, for some reason, I don't know why, she was coming back to the United States. She wanted somebody to sublet her apartment there in Taichung. And Ted connected me with her, and it worked out. The gears meshed, and I essentially moved to Taichung.
Okay.
And moved into that apartment with a couple of different roommates.
That's a whole different world, Taichung.
Yeah, wow.
Wow.
Wow is, I traveled around Europe and North Africa, but it's maybe similar to when you arrive in Morocco for the first time, or you arrive in Egypt for the first time. You're on another planet. And rules, you don't have a clue what the rules really are, socially especially, and with other teachers. And the first clue I got there in no suitcase.
No suitcase.
Now, ironically, because I have spent 26, 27 years living in Scandinavia, mainly last dozen years in Copenhagen. Guess where my bag was sent instead of Taipei? They found my bag in the Copenhagen airport.
Oh, that's funny.
Talk about time traveling mysteries.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a little issue with time travel.
Yeah, I was stuck in time, but my suitcase was unstuck in time.
Yeah, well, no, you landed in Taiwan. That's a kind of time traveling. That's a different planet.
I had nothing. I mean, I had my wallet.
You had your wallet because your suitcase was sent to Copenhagen.
Yeah, my passport, my wallet, my suitcase was in the Nordic kingdoms. Anyway, but the wow, I thought I had some kind of readability of Chinese. But of course, I'd studied with all simplified characters, mainland Chinese text.
Yeah, that didn't help.
So all that I realized immediately, let's say you want to go from point A to point B in the city, you can't read any of the street signs. You have no idea what they say. So that's the first part of the wow is you realize you're like a child who has wandered into the room in the middle of the movie, and you really don't know what's going on. So I was just like, in a kind of culture shock, but I was there for that. I mean, I knew from traveling previously, I knew that there would be a shock period at the beginning.
What was Taiwanese culture like at that time? What was the thing that stood out to you?
Well, I lived in what was really Taiwanese Buddhist, like folk Buddhist neighborhood, and it was on a sort of a side street that, first of all, open sewers.
Open sewers.
Yeah. So, there was a fragrance. Let's say there was a mix of cooking, excrement, herbal medicine, liniments. There was a kind of the atmosphere, like everywhere in the world you travel, particularly you travel in North Africa, there's a fragrance of earthiness that's quite pronounced. Maybe you in those days, you could feel it in southern Spain in the 1970s, for example. It was not yet super uncomfortably hot. I think I had arrived like in early May or something like that. Just at the time you'd like to be going somewhere else.
Yes.
Like also hurricane season was coming. But I lived on a little courtyard surrounded by 5-6-story apartment buildings. And the first thing I remember, the first morning, waking up to some kind of screaming going on the courtyard. And I look down, this guy comes cruising in on a motorcycle, like a kind of Honda 50 motorcycle. Small but loud.
Yeah, little scooter.
And he's yelling out, "Yo, at the top of his lungs, he's yelling out this phrase, which I came to learn was the local language, probably a Hakka, meaning oil stick. And what he's got on the back of his motorcycle, he's got
Youtiao.
Yeah, in the local dialect.
Yeah.
So he's got wooden frames on the back of his luggage carrier on his motorcycle. And in these wooden frames, he's got freshly pressed tofu, still warm. And And sticking up out of his luggage carrier like French bread baguettes are these oil sticks, donuts, basically large pieces of fried dough.
Yes.
And
Delicious.
little by little, people, mostly the women of the neighborhood, come pouring out of the buildings and surrounding this guy. And he's got a look a little bit like Clark Gable on a motorcycle. He's got maybe a nice little mustache and a jaunty cap. Quite a stylish guy. And he knows he's kind of a show for the neighborhood. He's also the alarm clock because he comes yelling in on the motorbike. It's like, 6:45 a.m., 7 a.m., which for me, being a late riser, was a radical way to wake up. But you get used to it. I think he came, at least every other day, he'd come screaming in the courtyard at 7 in the morning. So Taiwan was progressively getting hotter and sweatier. It was about the period when people started going from relying on walking and bus to having their own little motorbike, their own, like a little Vespa or a small little Honda motorbike. So there was, and all these two-stroke engines, so an incredible amount of exhaust fumes and black grit in the air. You had to wear, I finally got a bicycle to get around to language classes. You had to wear a white mask, a surgical mask, not for microbiological reasons, but because when you got to where you were going, you take it off, it would literally be coated with this black particles from the air pollution was so intense.
Yeah, the air pollution is like science fiction level bad.
Yeah, quite. So it was like, and then there's the night markets and the herb shops.
You said herb shops. Did you study any medicine while you were there? Did you come across any?
Focused on Chinese language. So I was in this intensive, the person I was subletting from turned me on to the Language Institute. It was Taipei Language Institute in Taichung. And it was a grind. I mean, again, complex characters and Wei Giles pinyin. So 2 levels of blockages between me and the language.
Doubly painful.
Teachers were tough. I mean, they were like drill sergeants.
That's what you want.
Yeah, it's not what I wanted, but it's what I needed.
Yeah, that's right. Get that tone right. Get that ma tone right, or you're ma someone's ma, and that's not good.
No, not good at all. So it was a lot of intensive language study. I think the closest I came, I didn't have really a goal I knew I was headed into intense medical studies. I knew that was coming, so I was able to focus on language study mainly. And shopping, almost daily shopping for Kungxin Cai was the big one I remember, the sort of local version of watercress, empty heart vegetable.
Yes, Kongxin Cai. Delicious.
Kungxin Cai.
Yeah, very popular in Taiwan. And how about the pineapple? How about the pineapple down there?
Incredible. Pineapple, papaya, mangoes. The big deal was getting mangoes to sink a ship. And every afternoon, as a way of cooling off, we'd have tea time with fresh mango slices.
Because you didn't have air conditioning back then, did you?
We didn't have window. We didn't have, there were no windows. There was just openings with wooden shutters.
Oh, wooden shutters. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
No screens.
Yeah.
It was you and the bugs and the geckos on the wall. It was had hot and sweaty all the time, all night long, hot and sweaty. Unbelievable. I'm not a fan of the tropics.
I was lucky when I was there because there was air conditioning.
Oh yeah, I mean forget it. I don't think maybe. Oh yeah, I do remember. Speaking of air conditioning, one of the phenomena was when we just get to the end of our road with the heat and the humidity. You could go to a movie theater, and there was air conditioning in the movie theater. So the movie theaters would be packed with people just getting an hour or two of cool temperature, cool down. They have vivid memories. At that point, I don't know which political party was holding power at that time.
Oh, I know which one it was. It was the Kuomintang, because you were still there during martial law.
I think Kuomintang was the probable party in power. But anyway, so go to the movie theater to cool off. I have vivid memories of that. And shopping for vegetables was a great entertainment, and a chance to use a little language.
Of course. Now, you were there for long enough to learn some language. How did that serve you when you got to the mainland? Because my suspicion is you picked up a Taiwanese slurry accent that probably didn't go over so well on the mainland.
Well, I was very stubborn to keep my Beijing Hua.
You kept your Beijing Hua. So did the Taiwanese look at you like, what? Like, what's wrong with you?
Oh, they looked at me like that. Once I got hit by a motorcycle because the guy, I think I was maybe the only Anglo that anybody had seen.
And you're speaking Beijing Hua.
Well, I wasn't speaking at all. I was just walking down the street, crossing the street, and this man just was so gobsmacked looking at me that he actually just crashed right in, hit me, knocked me right down with his motorcycle. In general, people were wonderful. I mean,
yeah. Well, the poor guy, he thought he saw a ghost.
Yeah, exactly.
Because ghosts are quite real there.
Yeah, he probably thought he could just drive through this apparition.
That's right. That's just a ghost. Whoa, look at that ghost. Whoa, thunk.
Yeah. And at the time, I had like a red beard.
Oh.
And long hair, red beard. And would sometimes wear shorts because it's so hot.
Yeah.
And, so legs with hair. Yeah, you really were like a freak.
So did your language, when you got to the mainland, could you use it? Were you like up to speed?
I mean, I was starting to use it already because I'd been staying over a year. So I was able to have little tiny conversations. One place I would practice was my colleague friend who I was subletting from. When she was still there, she introduced us to her money changer friend, people who change money at the black market.
Yeah, they didn't have ATMs back then.
Well, not only that, but you get a much better rate than if you go to a bank.
Yeah, so you work with the mafia.
It's precisely where I was going. What you find out is you go to their, I'm taken out on this voyage, so I don't know where, down the side streets and back alleyways. I end up at this, she takes me to what looks like a very fancy upscale boutique for men's clothing. Maybe there was women's clothing too, I don't recall, but it was a very fancy place. And it was like a salon where you would sit around a table with the proprietors and have tea and discuss polite things and how you doing, what are the children doing today, blah, blah. So I got a little chance to practice. Then she'd basically at some point say, well, how much do you want? How much money in your for? And you trade them money they could use when they travel out of the country. And also you come to learn, they would arrange, for the purposes of renewing your visa stay, they would arrange smuggling trips. The main thing that they smuggled were, I think, eyeglass frames. And they had a circuit where they would take something from Taiwan. I'm not even sure what. I never did the smuggling trip, but my friend did it a couple of times. So it was a colorful situation, and there was a chance to practice some language.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
So anyway, I did my time. I went into the mainland. I had to have 2 passports. This is 1982. And if you appeared immigration in the mainland with a Taiwanese stamp, forget about it. They're not letting you in. You're definitely a spy. So it was times were different, but I had a connection in Hong Kong for transition. So I went from Taiwan to Hong Kong. I spent a month in Hong Kong, kind of socializing and observing clinically with a man named Gary Butt, another fantastic person. I think he now lives in Australia since, the changes took place in Hong Kong. Anyway, so then I went up the Pearl River on a hovercraft to Guangzhou to enter. So I entered into China, crossed the border in the middle of the Pearl River. Essentially, a speedboat comes out to meet your boat, and then the army guys board your boat and check everybody's papers, and then they let you go out and land in Guangzhou docks. So it was rough travel. I mean, I decided to do it that way.
Why that way? Why? I mean, other than it's exciting.
I was just an adventurer, in my spirit. I probably still am, I suppose. What's the most adventurous way you can go into China? Up the river on a boat.
Exactly.
To the Guangzhou.
Well, look, you're the guy who hitchhiked from Oregon to Boston to investigate and see if a school was real. So, yeah, I can see you going to. And then I want to learn some Chinese. Well, I'll just go to Taichung. Okay.
All gratitude goes to the people who connected me into Taichung, and Giovanni connected me into China, and telling me the procedure to end up in the clinic that's going to be really useful. Certain protocols of cultural politeness and
like what? What did he tell you to do?
Well, it's interesting. He said, there's a teacher you definitely want to study with. His name is Dr. Xu, XU, who was on the team of writers for the Essentials. Great teacher clinically. And so what you want to do is go to the head of the program and ask if you could come for tea. And then when you get in private with him, you tell him that your old friend Giovanni recommended me to kindly request that I be put in the clinic of Dr. Xu. And that was duly noted. And of course, no guarantees of anything. And then tea time and goodbye, see you later. And then you get your assignment and you're in Dr. Xu's clinic. Guanxi, exactly. Because the old friend recommended you.
Of course.
So anyway, what I was really why I took us into China now was talking about the rite of passage with learning Chinese. So, of course, we had simultaneous translation going on in the classroom teaching for the 3 months study at Nanjing. But I was also able to therefore listen. It was like a great course in medical Chinese because you could hear the teacher.
Yes.
Although even you might not understand them because they had a Shanghainese.
They got some kind of accent.
I think Dan discussed this sure, all sounding like all the same. So forget all your initials down the drain. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but you could listen to the medical Chinese lecture and then right away get the translation into English and check it against what you thought the person said. So it was like a double-barreled course in not only medicine, but in medical Chinese language.
Yeah.
So I had extensive notes from that period and some small amount of translation that I'd done. And I had bought a lot of, various silk shirts or whatever gifts for people back home, and some amount of hundreds of needles or whatever, moxa. And I had it all packed in a duffel bag, fly out from Shanghai to Hong Kong airport, and then transition through Hong Kong airport to get the flight back through Hawaii to the United States. Well, so I arrive in the Hong Kong airport with my suitcase and my big duffel bag with everything, all my year of research, language study, medical study, etc. And I run into this young man who's struggling. He has no idea what's going on. He's obviously doesn't have any experience in China, has no language capability. He's in the Hong Kong airport, lost. I don't know if he asked me for help or I volunteered. He needed a piece of information he didn't know how to get. And I said, okay, I'm going to leave my bags here with you. Watch our bags, and I'll go get this information for you. I had to make a phone call or something. I don't recall. But so I come back, and I give him his information, and he's, thank you. And then we're ready to say goodbye. And I look down, and there's my suitcase, but no duffel bag.
Oh, my goodness.
He'd been scammed by some slick operators who distracted him and took off with his duffel bag. So my year of research in China has gone into the hand of opportunistic thieves in the Hong Kong airport.
Who I am sure were incredibly disappointed to see what they had.
I'm sure they were very bummed out. A bunch of silk threads and acupuncture needles and notebooks of paper. Anyway, so I came back to teach in New England school. And at this point, we had written a second-year program, and I'd inherited. Ted was kind enough to sort of pass off the concepts course to me to teach, and he was teaching a second-year acupuncture internal medicine. He called acupuncture pathology. So I had to give like 3 or 6 hours of lecture a week, and I had been planning to lecture from all this research I'd compiled while in China. Now it's all gone. I'd shipped myself a lot of Chinese medical paperback books. So I had stacks of Chinese books on everything I needed to teach, but it was all in Chinese. So I had to do some serious burning the midnight oil in the upstairs study. Well, little by little, I got actually somewhat proficient at translating Chinese medical books because I had to translate 6 hours lecture every week. And all thanks to the thieves of the Hong Kong airport.
All thanks to the thieves at the Hong Kong airport.
If they hadn't stolen that, I would have definitely would have taken the lazy man's approach of just using the research I'd done for that year, and I wouldn't have been grinding away, translating night after night up in the attic. So life is a funny way of bringing you to where you're needed.
It really does. And man, I can think of some experiences that at the moment, it's like, man, what a bad break. And then in retrospect, it sometimes turns into a lucky break.
Yeah, I mean, I was crushed when I realized that bag is gone and it's not coming back.
Yeah.
A year of struggle and sweat.
Makes it even worse because you're being kind and helpful to somebody. And what's the reward? A lot of nights translating Chinese. That's what it is. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought it was ironic, but he was giving me the greatest gift that I needed for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Your Chinese, hard won. A lot of work. How did you get involved with formulas and strategies? Your name's on both of the editions.
This is another serendipity. This is because I love espresso and cappuccino in the north end of San Francisco. So here, set the stage. There's a conference. There's a medical conference, a gathering of all the different, at that point were sort of the rival factions scrambling around trying to get a toehold.
Who are the rival factions? At this point in time, who are the rival factions?
The Asian players, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and this is all in California. Mm. Then there's the unique teaching and transmission of Ted Kapchuk, Worsley, and Felix Mann, who was represented by somebody else. Not Felix Mann, excuse me, Van Buren's school. Possibly it was a Vietnamese acupuncturist who made the Van Nie, I don't know, could have been anyway. It was this epic summit meeting of all the different schools of thought. We're all going to get together in a conference. And it was the first time this had been pulled together.
Who on earth pulled something like that together?
This is an aspect I was not involved in. I attended, but I didn't know who was the coordinator. I mean, Ted would tell you for sure if you ask him.
Man, I'm just thinking, what a project to take on at that moment in time. Anyway, it sounds like they pulled it off. You were there.
It was amazing because at a certain point, of course, each person had their time slot for their own point of view. But then they also had a couple times a big panel discussion where literally you had on the stage at the same time all those different representatives, Ted and the whole bag. And it was fascinating. Oh, yeah, there was also a guy who was representing the medical doctors. I forget his name. So it was literally every kind of point of view was represented. And
how amazing.
It was an amazing meeting. Well, anyway, so during the course of this 2-3 day event, I would occasionally, when there was a break for lunch or something, I'd run into San Francisco Chinatown, get some food, and then I'd hop skip over a few blocks up into the North Beach, I guess would technically be North Beach area, to one of these great Italian cafe bars. Now, it was a beautiful sunny day.
Mm-hmm.
They had some tables outside on the sidewalk. So I get my cappuccino and thank my lucky stars for where life has brought me. I'm sitting in this wonderful conference weekend and having my cappuccino in the sunlight in San Francisco. Comes strolling by on the sidewalk, Dan Bansky. This is back to your question, how did I get involved in formulas and strategies?
Yeah.
So Dan recognized me because when I was apprenticing with Ted back in 77, 78, there was a week when this visiting guy showed up whose name was Dan Bensky.
Mm. Another Macau dude.
Yeah, another Macau dude. Flute player. Also, he has silver flute with him. So they would see patients together.
You and Dan.
So the three of us would be in the room. I'd be like fly on the wall observer. And Dan and Ted would take pulses at the table and do some questioning. And then three of us would leave the room and have a discussion like, what's going on with this person and what do you propose to do for therapy? And of course, they had completely two different diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
And, me coming out of a long term in the medical world and being a novice in the field of traditional Chinese medicine, I was like, what's going on? These two guys who are probably the most capable of knowledge in this area, they can't even agree on a simple clinical intake. Really different ideas about what was going on, and then arguing about it, through some kind of logical process. But it suddenly hit me. It was like a major awakening and turning point in my whole study of Chinese medicine. This is an art.
Mm.
I realized I'm back in the arts.
Mm.
I'm not an acupuncturist.
Mm.
I'm a healing arts practitioner.
Yeah.
And so I don't define myself actually as an acupuncturist, but more as a healing arts practitioner.
Yeah, I get that. I feel it. What a wonderful opportunity to watch something like that unfold. Two people,
yeah, and then
top of their game. It's like, I see it like this, I see it like that. Well, maybe both and. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there's a whole gestalt
both and, either
that
or.
happens. Yeah. And
then it came up to like, what are you going to do for treatment? And again, they completely disagree. Maybe they'd have one point in common, but Dan would typically put in 2, 3, 4 needles max. And Ted would be like quite a few needles all over the place.
Dan's always been a precise minimalist.
He's a precise minimalist. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
So that was like a real awakening and a great opportunity.
Okay. So you're minding your own business, sitting on a beautiful summer day, sipping your cappuccino, and Bensky walks by.
Yeah, and so because I had this clinical experience with him, he recognized me, I recognized him, and he stopped and said, "How's it going? What are you doing? What are you working on?" And I said, "Well, actually, I've started to try to translate a book on internal medicine, but I've hit the wall and realized I'm in the wrong place of the library. I should be translating a book on formulas because without a formulas course, you're not really going to get internal medicine." So, okay, that's fine. We're doing the same thing, he says. And, we're going to try to do it with Andy Gamble and Ted Kapchuk. But at this point, certain differences had occurred in the materia medica process. And Ted had become, from one of the three authors, he had become the guy who wrote the introduction. And there's a whole story there that I won't even go into. But it turned out that it had come down to Andy Gamble and Dan Bensky were going to do this formulas book. So Dan, being smart and good businessman, saw the possibility, which I didn't even think of course, being just a nerd. And so 2 weeks later, after this chance encounter on the sidewalk, I get a letter saying, "Oh, great to meet you at the conference. Interesting that you're working on a book on formulas. So are we. Would you consider we just join with us and we'll just do it? Because we're having a bit of a problem making headway." Come to find out that for various reasons, Dan was doing the lion's share of the initial work, and Andy was unavailable to complete his part. So it came down to the three of us were going to do it. But then Andy could never find the time in his life at that point to contribute. So it came down to just the two of us, and we just took, Dan decided, well, we'll take Andy's formulas and divide them up between us, and we'll just put those in addition to what we're doing, each of us, and forge ahead. But it was a grind. I mean, I'd been working on it. When I met Dan at that coffee meeting, I'd already been working for a good 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm. You were like the perfect guy for the job then, because you've already been grinding away on it.
At that point in time, I was ripe and ready for the picking. And Dan realized, well, this is great. I'll get the work done and also eliminate the competition all in one stroke. And granted, I probably never would have finished the book without the guidance of John O'Connor, Dan Bensky.
Oh, man. Yeah, John O'Connor is a true unsung hero of Chinese medicine. In everything he's done to bring us all these publications through Eastland Press, holy smokes. Well,
yeah, and a vivid illustration of that was once we had finished the translation and compilation, because the book is, the Formulas and Strategies is not just a translation of a book, it's a compilation of integrated translation from a dozen different books.
Mm-hmm.
So our process was, I had this huge Danish desk where I could put out the wings, and I had dictionaries and books covering the entire surface of this table for about a year. And John O'Connor also wrote the contract for that book. It was a punishing contract, I have to say. But when it came time that the book was actually compiled, I don't know who they got to try to be the editor. I actually forget who it was, but anyway, it just didn't work. For some reason, John and Dan decided this isn't working. And I think they might have tried like 2 different people in a row. It wasn't working, and John O'Connor stepped in and handled the editorial work, which, as you can imagine, because you've seen the book,
mm-hmm.
is a Herculean task.
Yes.
And he did that.
Yes, in addition to everything else he was doing at Eastland Press.
Exactly. It delayed the book maybe a year or 2, but it came out in 1990, the first edition. And I was like a limp rag after that. There were days when I slept under the desk because I couldn't find my bedroom at the end of the day. I'd been so crazy. It was really crazy. Also, admittedly, my facility with Chinese, because even though you can say medical Chinese is much easier to get a handle on, still, when you're in a discussion of analysis of the formula and applications, there's a lot of plain language thrown into the text that you have to wade through. And for me, it was a real, I wrote that translation with a dictionary on both sides.
It is exhausting work to go between languages.
And hard on the eyes.
It's hard on the eyes. it makes you exhausted. I found when I was doing Huang's book, probably in part because my Chinese, okay-ish, but not super great, I'd first do a translation. I'd take it from Chinese into Chinglish.
Absolutely.
Because then, just because that's what I had to do, I had to take it into Chinglish, and then later I'd look at the Chinglish and I'd turn that into English.
Yeah, there was a lot of rewriting before it ever got handed over to the editor.
Man, yeah.
That must have been.
And it's exhausting, but you know what? It makes your Chinese a lot better.
Yeah.
And you learn the material.
Oh yeah, the transformation of real deep understanding was the main fruit of doing that book.
Yeah, of course. And you know what else it is? It is you've been mentioning gratitude throughout our conversation. It's a way to express some gratitude for what we've been given, to be able to have the capacity to bring it from one language to another and be of help to those who are coming along and learning. It's not a bad day's work.
It was partly like, if you see a great painting or a great film, you want to share it with somebody. And so when you discover this healing work that's so vast and so interesting and so useful, well, you just want to have it available to other people. I was done after doing that book. I knew that I had lifted a huge karmic burden off my shoulders. And I had no further interest to do any more translation of Chinese medicine after that, in terms of writing books. It's just enervating to the nth degree. I think Dan felt the same way. I mean, he felt that way after the Materia Medica, but had committed himself to the formula completion.
Well,
we have to really give huge thanks to John O'Connor and Dan Bensky. I mean, their work is unbelievable. And also I have to personally thank John O'Connor for continual communications over the years. It's been now, 34 years, that book. He's communicated through the second edition and all the way.
Yeah, they've been at it for a long time. I did a conversation with them at the very, very beginning of Qiological. It might be like episode 8. We talked about the history of Eastland Press and how the acupuncture book that they did, they thought it was just going to be a curiosity that history and language departments would carry at universities, because at that time there were no acupuncture schools. But at the time that it published, the schools were just beginning to open up. And they just happened to be situated for that to be received by people who were in the process of learning acupuncture. It was not foreseen. It was not planned. It just kind of arose. It emerged. And they've been doing that publishing work ever since.
I agree with what Zev Rosenberg said on your podcast, that when that book came out, it was like, okay, this is the book I'm going to use now. Mm-hmm. It was a revelation.
Yeah.
It had information that we'd already been getting through Ted Kapchuk's Seat of the Pants translation that he was doing for several years in the 70s. The gift was there in lecture form, but to have it all compiled in an authoritative text, that was quite something.
So you do the book, and then what happens?
Well, again, huge gratitude to Ted Kapchuk. He's one of the people who I worked with in the first couple of years. John Meyerson. I don't know if have you ever had Don Halfkenny on your podcast?
I have not. I have heard of him. If you could help me to get him on the show, that would be great.
I would if I knew how to contact him. He, like myself, went to Europe and never came back. I think he's in Germany, last I heard. Now, he had continued to be, like you could say, the lineage holder of Dr. So's work.
Oh.
And he has a most amazing background story. To have a conversation with Don Halfkenny would be fantastic. I had one of my great early adventures with Don it had come to a point where, in the early days of New England School of Acupuncture, we were registered, licensed to operate as a vocational school through the Department of whatever, post-secondary education in Massachusetts. They were constantly trying to close us down. She was the head of this department. Her agenda was, you have to kind of also put yourself in her shoes. Here she is tasked with regulating this thing that nobody knows anything about, and she will for sure be blamed if anything goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So in true bureaucratic style, her goal became get rid of us, close us down, go somewhere else, do this in California, not in the sacred New England Journal backyard. So a lot of my work, the first year I was hired, after I graduated from the first year program, I was hired to teach point location and be one of the 3 administrators with John Myerson and Don Halfkenny. When you sit in an office with these guys for years, you get to know them pretty well. We had, at a certain point, we had constantly to fill out paperwork. They'd throw us questions that we'd have to answer, and they'd give us a deadline. So their game was basically pose these educational dilemmas to us, educational administration dilemmas, and then give us a deadline, like in 7 days, you have to give us a complete answer for what your plan is for this. Well, one of the things in those days, probably, I don't know if it's still a fact, because we were a private company, we had to post a performance bond. That is, in the education business, you take in tuition before you've delivered the services.
Mm.
So you have to be bonded in case you fail to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Then it has to be, cover the legal implications of getting students want their money back. So you couldn't operate unless you had this bond. Well, one of the preceding administrators, the person who left that made the slot available for me to be hired, his name was Stephen Breaker. It was through his father that we had gotten the first bond, I think. It came before I was even working there. When Stephen left, the bond was leaving also, because his father wasn't going to get this bond for anybody but his son. So it was really tough. Here we are, nobody's ever heard of what we're doing, and we're going in to ask for a bonding.
So you need to come up with some money for a bond, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. I think the bond was like $50,000 or something. It was a ridiculous amount of money. Anyway, so they're gonna shut us down. So one day we show up at the school to work, and I'm not exaggerating at all. There are chains. We had a big, huge metal sliding door with a handle apparatus to unlock and slide open in this mill building. We get there are chains on the door, so you can't open it.
You were locked out.
From the Department of Education, like a cease and desist order.
Yeah.
So Don Halfkenny, having been an activist for most of his life, at least the part of his life I know about, he invokes a lawyer that he knows from his work outside the New England School. And this guy, I think, is in New Hampshire, just across the border in New Hampshire. And Don, as a favor, I guess, and I'm not sure exactly how Don pulled it off, but this will be a great story to hear. I remember we get in Don's car and speed well over the speed limit, because we're on the school is being locked.
You're on a mission.
We're on a mission from God. We're going to get the bond in New Hampshire, which we did, and successfully reopened the school. Anyway, Don Halfkenny also was a great teacher of Dr. So's methods and his point location. He was a maestro of point location. And I think maybe a drummer, a musician as well. And he's a man who had a very natural sense of style and charisma. Wonderful guy. So if you can find Don Halfkenny, definitely want to invite him on.
Got the school unlocked. Oh my gosh.
He actually goes back to the original Lincoln Detox Center, I think, was where he was first trained in ear acupuncture.
Wow, yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Stories to tell, a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah, there's so many curious threads that came together in that period that you first started entering the profession as well. It was like an emergent phenomena.
It was just the 60s, the 60s and early 70s. It's something that I hope we never have to go through again in one way, because it was the war years. I mean, a lot of it was the camaraderie. Also came from political action, anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, really even before that. And Martin Luther King Jr. was putting that all together, which is most likely the reason he was done away. But, as he knew, you can kill the person, but you don't kill the dream.
Yeah, sometimes killing the person makes the dream all the stronger.
Unfortunately, that is often the case.
Unfortunately. But the dream of this Chinese medicine thing, that apparently has gotten some legs.
Oh, I'm flabbergasted now. When I go to the Pacific Symposium, I'm blown away not only at the variety of lectures and the confidence of people that started out probably quite like myself, a bit of fumbling and stumbling, but the passion and the spirit of adventure is still there. It's in it, it's taken on a different form, appropriate to the time, but I still feel that the passion and spirit among all the attendees there. I love the Pacific Symposium. It's a way to get a cultural upgrade on what's going on.
I like that. Cultural upgrade.
By the way, in terms of gratitude, thanks to Rick Gold, who introduced us. I have to say, I do think it's true that the first acupuncture needle I had put in me, and the first acupuncture needle I put in somebody else was both Rick Gold in 1977 New England School needle practice.
Were you guys in the same class?
Yeah.
He had quite a story, and he's already been on the podcast telling that. So if y'all haven't listened to it, Rick has an interesting background.
Have you had Satya Ambrose? I don't know if that's her current name.
No, I'm not even familiar with that name.
Yeah, there's a whole story there.
Okay. Well, a piece of the story I'm curious about, you went to Europe.
Oh.
You finished the book and then disappeared.
Yeah, that's true.
It was so interesting because, look, I came along in like 95. Again, that's the book that's being used in my herb class. I know Bensky because he was right there. He founded the school I was at. There are a bunch of other people that I've heard of that are on names of books, Kapchik and, that whole crew, and Giovanni. And here's this Randall, I want to say Chevrolet, but I know it's not Chevrolet.
Barolet.
Yeah. Name on a book. And it's like, who is this cat? I've never met this cat.
Yeah, I mean, nobody can pronounce his name anyway. So
So he's out.
No.
But no, yeah. Randall Barolet, like who is this guy? But you were nowhere to be found because you were overseas.
Well, I was somewhere to be found, but you'd have to go to the wild woods of Norway to find me.
What?
I mean, what happened, it's interesting, again, the strange ways of how destiny operates. Well, before I left, I was at the first, I think it was the first or maybe the second Pacific Symposium. And we were doing our morning Qigong. And there was a funny person all dressed in white with red hair. And he was like leaping around among the Qigong participants. I don't know, what is this guy doing? Well, afterwards, we're in the lobby and this odd appearing individual comes up to me and introduces himself. I'm Gabriel Stux, medical doctor from Germany. And I have somebody I'd like you to meet. So apparently he'd been leaping around trying to pick out people to introduce to this person that was with him. Anyway, so he takes me off to the side, in a little alcove in the lobby. And there's this fairly sturdy looking gentleman there. And he introduces me. He says, this is Dr. Ravi Jaffe. And he's got some things he wants to tell you about. So Do you know Robert Shafee at all?
No, not at all.
Well, I think he goes by the name Ibrahim now. But he's a medical doctor who had, through processes he was involved in with his own healthcare, awakened his clairvoyant vision to a fairly astonishing degree. And he had started a school of energy healing in Sedona, Arizona, that he called the School of Energy Mastery. So he was there to sort of promote the school, and Gabriel Stux was going around finding people to bring to him. So he brought me over. And Robbie did like a little reading on me, and we talked a little bit about my time in China, etc. And lo and behold, he said, you should come to this. I'm giving a 5-day intensive introduction to energy healing in Sedona. You should come. So I went to this energy healing course. And at the end of it, I won't even try to describe the things that went on in this course. It was like waking up to chi and spirit on another level. It really embodied a lot of embodying practices, a lot of meditation practices of different kinds, and small group healing, one-on-one healing, self-healing, etc. At the end, he said, well, tomorrow, if you have time, let's have lunch. And he asked me to come work with him at the school as his assistant and to be sort of an editor of a book he wanted to write.
Wait a minute. This kind of rhymes with other things that have happened in your life.
Yeah. I mean, again, I am a Vedic astrologer. I mean, about half my work now is I work in astrological consulting. And so there are definitely destiny patterns, and the interaction of your destiny patterns with your free will, creating new patterns and ripples in your destiny. So there are themes that ripple through your life. And this is certainly being blessed with amazing teachers is one of the themes that keeps coming up in my life. So I went, and he said, yeah, the thing is that if you want to come work with me, you can't. I was teaching at Santa Barbara College at that time. The old California Acupuncture College had split into 3, and one was called Santa Barbara College of Oriental Medicine. He said, you can't continue. You have to move over here to Sedona to work with me. And the funny thing is, I'd been feeling this coming for about a year before. I'd been in my meditations. I could feel there's something coming, and I don't know what it is. There's a big change coming. But I knew I had to be patient, and sure enough, Stux picked me out and introduced me to Ravi, or Ibrahim. Anyway, so I went. I decided, okay, this is what I've been waiting for. It seemed clear. So I went to attend the School of Energy Mastery and work with him. Also, we did a lot of healing sessions one-on-one. I think I was there about 1.5 years working with that group. We went to Europe and started a European energy school. Actually, about half the class in the United States traveled there from Germany and Switzerland and France and Austria and Italy, a couple of people from Italy. So we put together an energy healing school intensive the first one was in Italy, in a summertime ski resort. We just, took over the whole large function building. So that certainly was another step of opening to a different kind of knowledge, different way of working. And also I was introduced to dowsing, going back to New England School when I was first working there as a teacher in the 70s.
Dowsing, like finding water with a stick type dowsing.
Well, yeah, the definition of dowsing really in its most general form would be finding what's needed.
Oh.
So if you need water, you can go searching for water. But in finding what's needed, the English medical doctor and homeopaths had used radiesthesia, that is pendulum dowsing, or some use actual radionics disc or radionics devices.
Wait, radionics? I don't know what radionics is.
Well, radionics actually, there's this whole story developed by a Stanford medical doctor, Dr. Abrams, who developed the first device. He actually came upon it by noticing he was palpating people's abdomens and noticed different phenomena that were occurring systematically with different categories of illness. And he thought there's something going on here anyway. He evolved it, and other workers evolved it. But it took root in England with the British medical doctor homeopaths. And I'd been introduced to dowsing for water or dowsing for any object in the ground using what are called L rods. They're like little tubes that hold a free floating rod in the shape of an L. The L being you're holding the one leg of the L, and they're free to turn, and you can search for underground water, even a water pipe. Like so, we were at a party. I got a lot of my great connections if I go into parties. So it was a school party. One of the students there, his name was, I believe, Jim Martin, had just come back. He applied to us from Nepal. So we got a letter from Nepal asking if he could be in the class at New England School. A really astounding character who I became friends with later. And at this party, he said, "Hey, you ever tried dowsing rods?" I said, "Well, I've heard of it. I know people, like you said, looking for water, looking for a well." So the application is, if you pose a question, very carefully designed question that's very limited and accurate, you can have a question and answer method also with dowsing instrument, like a pendulum, for example. If you pose, well, let's not go into the whole mechanics of it. Anyway, so we went on the front yard of his house, and he gave me the L rods. He said, "I know where the underground water pipe is in this front yard. See if you can find it with these rods." So okay. So I go walking across the yard, and again, like a magnetic field almost feeling, the rods go whoops. You could feel like you're in a force field of some kind. When you move back and forth with the L rods, they would swing out and back in. He said, "Yep, that's where it is, right there." And so it was like having the chi experience for the first time, but on another level, a non-material level. So little by little, and then when I was teaching at National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon, because I had spent some years practicing after graduation in Oregon before I went to China. Again, students there, wonderful colleagues, said, "Hey, we think you might be interested in this device we've got." They take me into like a storage closet, a big storage room, really. And they take a sheet, I think it had a sheet over this. It was like a desk, and it had dials and numbered dials all across it, and a couple of smooth surfaces of different material. So this is a radionics table, and we've used it to research problems for farmers where they're having crop failures of various kinds, and we diagnose what's the problem with. Is it the soil? Is it the pests or what, whatever. So I had these exposures, but I didn't have any strong inclination towards it. But when I was hired to teach at Santa Barbara College, the person I was essentially replacing, here's another person that'd be wonderful for your podcast, Kearney Buzzkirk. You probably have not heard of Kearney Buzzkirk. I can put you in touch with Kearney because we're still in touch. So he had stopped teaching, but has continued his private practice. And he'd been studying what was termed German biological medicine, which was application of homeopathy with searching for different remedies using electronic devices on meridian points. Anyway, so he said, "Why don't you come after we had tea?" And I met, this is my first week in Santa Barbara. He said, "Why don't you come visit my home where I'm practicing?" And I walked into this room, and it was as if all these practices that I had been exposed to, in addition to Chinese medicine and acupuncture, which he was doing also. He was also a licensed acupuncturist in California and Oregon. They were all in one integrated system. Matter of fact, he called it the integrating system. And it was, he had experiences that led him to see that dowsing could be used for medical inquiry, finding what's needed. So finding what's needed for optimum benefit for somebody, finding what's needed in which therapeutic modality might be best, which framework of understanding to characterize the situation for the person's struggle. He had systematized a flow chart of questions and answers that you could douse your way through by asking a question at a time that would lead you into a deeper, like a branching flow chart of understanding through different frameworks of understanding different therapies. So that was a huge turning point for me. And I started to apprentice with him. I moved to Santa Barbara from New England, 85. I was teaching there from 85 to 92, started writing the book, started and finished writing the formulas and strategies there. But at that point, Kearney reintroduced me because I had studied homeopathy already, but I wasn't using it much.
Wait a minute. You were in Santa Barbara late 80s into early 90s?
85 to 92.
85. So you were working on the book in Santa Barbara, the formulas book.
I've been working on the book in Martha's Vineyard, and when I was teaching in Boston, I was in living in Lake Erie, Cochrane.
How long did it take you to do that? What was the gestation period on that book?
Like I said, I'd been working on it, I think, for 2.5, 3 years already, trying to work on an internal medicine book and then switching over to actually translate formulas. I completed a lot of translation. Analysis of formula was what I did for my OMD degree at California Acupuncture College. So I think by the time, I'd finished the writing, I recollect maybe by 88 or 89.
Okay.
Like I said, took a year and a half or so to, I don't know, 8 years maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I was just trying to put the timelines together there.
Yeah. When Betsy sent me the list and deadline, that lit a fire and accelerated the whole process.
Yeah. Deadlines are helpful.
Actually, funny how I came into astrology also, because Kearney is also quite a skillful astrologer himself. And this is before I had studied astrology. I'm great gratitude to my astrology teacher, a man named Hart Defoe. He was teaching with the Ayurvedic Institute in New Mexico. But I had, again, crazy good fortune to get on a waiting list to study with his professional training course. After 10 years of people begging him, he had decided he would come to San Francisco and teach it. So I happened to be caretaking a ranch in the wilderness of Northern California. And
you seem to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been in Norway. I'm sitting on my couch in Norway, minding my own business in the mountains, remote mountains of Norway. And I'm reading like Lord of the Rings, I think, or The Hobbit. And it just comes to me out of the blue, like comes in my mind like a song. It's time to study the stars and the cosmos, which I had studied, like I did take a course in astrophysics when I was in Cornell.
Yeah, well, it's a good start.
I knew the voice meant it's time to really study astrology. Weighting the body and emotions and mind. And now, like, to open to the cosmic is where your job is now. So it took me, again, another year of searching without results. And then finally, I was in England visiting an astrology school to see if I wanted to study there. And I got this magazine, again, another magazine called The Mountain Astrologer. Somebody recommended. So I look in there, there's a little tiny ad for people, somebody in Seattle selling tape recordings, like cassettes, of speeches of various astrologers. So I picked a couple of these, a couple of Western and a couple of Vedic. And I put them on my little tape player and listened, and I got to this one, Heart Defoe, Vedic Astrology. It was like after dinner speech. I mean, when I heard his voice after like 15, 20 seconds, I knew this is it. This is the guy. I want to save this guy. I couldn't even tell you exactly why. It was something to do with, it was like meeting Ted Kapchuk in astrology, if that makes any sense.
You know, sometimes you're in fun. There are these moments where
fun.
opportunity meets willingness. It's like you hear an invitation. You can like grok the invitation. There's something you said a few minutes ago. I just want to come back to this.
I was on a trajectory of a long-winded connection to one of your former questions, which is now vanished in the haze.
This is how these conversations go. But I want to bring it back for a moment to finding what's needed. This is really powerful. Let me ask the question this way. Would you say this inquiry of finding what's needed is what...
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it posed quite a conundrum. I think it's also partly why Kearney had stopped teaching Chinese medicine, because he'd gone into this other realm of healing and discovered a path that was quite unique. It was rooted in these English practitioners as much as it was in homeopathy or anything else. These practitioners, a book recommendation for those in the audience, if you can find it, you can find it on Amazon if you search, called The Pattern of Health by Aubrey Westlake. If you put in Pattern of Health, Aubrey Westlake, Aubrey, fabulous person, teacher, practitioner, homeopath, dowser, mystic. I was turned on to sources of subtle anatomy in energy healing school, but that came later. First, as a dowser, let's put it this way: Ram Dass had already returned from India, and Be Here Now had been published. And so for anyone who's encountered the book Be Here Now, particularly in the 60s, I think it was published maybe end of the 60s, or maybe 70, I forget. It was like a revelation.
I think so.
It had a outline of a basic yoga routine. It had the fundamentals of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. I mean, it was his encounter with his guru and Neem Karoli Baba, etc. So there are a lot of sources of alternative thinking in the mix. By the time I got to meet Kearney, it was that Kearney had also kind of an engineer's mentality, that he had made systematic the application of the search process through what's called, the English doctors call it question and answer method, to make very particular questions and then douse for, is there resonance between the question and the person who's looking for help.
Okay, so this is super interesting. I'd like to talk more about it, but I'd like to do it on a different podcast. Maybe we could come back and have another conversation. And the reason I say that is because every now and then I'm sitting and having a conversation, sometimes on the podcast, sometimes often in clinic, and people will say something and I'll just be like, oh, wait a minute. There's something here. So this finding what's needed, this really has my attention.
Oh, is that right?
We're almost at 2 hours.
Oh my God, really?
I know, time flies when you're having fun, which we have been. Well, it's fun. At any rate, we should probably land this plane for now.
The hardest part of flying, I have to tell you, the hardest part of flying as a pilot is getting it back on the ground.
Landing the plane? Okay, well, I believe you, because when I'm up in the air, I'm always wondering. I hope they get this on the ground okay. So we're going to do that with this conversation in a moment. I just want to pause here. Thank you. Thank you for the work you've done. Thank you for the books that have landed in my hands that have helped me to learn the medicine, that took me to Asia, that gave me a foundation so that when I met people like Dr. Huang Huang, I could recognize, oh, I've never heard anything like this before, and jump in. Like, oh, great, this is different. I'm going to follow this and see where it goes.
Well, you've also made some brave leaps in your career change. You've talked about your career change.
I have made leaps.
Your
I've made leaps. Any life that, well, I can't say any life worth living. That's just, a ridiculous thing to say. But I would say that in my experience, for sure, it is the leaps, those discontinuous moments, leaving the known, going into the unknown with a kind of trepidation, but also it's like impossible not to move forward. And because it's so discontiguous, there's no way to know what it will look like. How will I land? How will I get there? Will I be able to feed myself on the way? Will I recognize myself at the other end of this process? It's not for the faint of heart, but it makes for a dang good life. And
no, I've met some really brave people who inspired me. All through, starting with my grandmother.
Yeah, for
right
sure.
To Michael Max.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, thanks for your work. It has, again, a foundation for so many of us.
Probably saved my life. I have to be thankful to the whole mysterious world.
Then we'll just leave it with that. A thank you to the mysterious world.
Thank you, Michael.
It's been my pleasure.
Oh, likewise.
Randall talked about hitchhiking his way from Oregon to Boston to see if this acupuncture school was a real thing. Now, there's a thing you don't hear much about these days, hitchhiking. Finding a ride from strangers, and the only thing in common is that you're headed in the same direction and both willing to take a chance that the journey might hold some mutual benefit. For all y'all that have never hitchhiked, it was an exercise in making a snap judgment that the person you've allowed into your car or the people in the car you're climbing into, that they're trustworthy. There were no driver reviews, no social credit built on the world portal that you keep in your pocket. You had to rely on your wits and capacity to navigate an ocean of uncertainty. It was both dangerous and enlivening. For sure, you needed to remain attentive, be looking for a way out of potentially dangerous situations, and know when and how to implement that exit. You also had the opportunity to meet amazing people who just might change the course of your life. Travel, especially off the beaten path of what you consider comfortable and safe. It will show you your biases and beliefs in stunningly sharp relief. Hitchhiking your way through another belief system or even a different socioeconomic class, it will open your world eyes. Best to travel light. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.